When I was a child, nearly all the secondary schools in my country were run by religious. There were girls' schools, often run by Loreto sisters, or Ursuline sisters, or Presentation sisters, but a lot of the other orders, the Dominicans, a lot of other orders had schools as well. And the same was true of the boys' schools. They were run by the Christian Brothers and the Maris and the Sacred Hearts, and the Jesuits had very fashionable schools. By a sort of accident, I went to a school that was run by lay people. And all the teachers were lay people. And as it happened while I was there, half were men and half were women. And the school accepted boys and girls, and Catholics and non-Catholics. The school had a kind of a peculiar feel about it. It was very unusual, and it was a little bit embarrassing for us when we went to play football games and a busload of girls were our supporters. And we also had to go when the girls were playing, and that was a little more embarrassing. But that's the way it was. I'm thankful that I went to that school. There was no very big effort to educate us to equality. But when the teachers noticed something, anything rough or any kind of disrespect for anybody, especially for the girls, they called you aside, and sometimes they talked about it publicly, but more often to yourself. They said, look, this is not the way to do it. Some of the women teachers had to take time off to have babies, and they talked to us and told us about that, and somehow it helped in a big way. In 2014, my class, the people who were at home, wanted to have a reunion of our class. And some people came and met, but it wasn't well organized because some people were far away. But they said, we'll have another reunion in 2019, which I attended in June this year. 7 members of my class had died, and 1 was unwell, but all the others turned up. And the ones that didn't come, the husbands or wives or children came, so everyone was represented. And we met for 24 hours. We met in the evening, and then we had that evening together, and the next day we kind of mixed and talked. I was happy that most of my classmates had successful lives and were happy basically, and we talked about that and we reminisced about school. When I talked the next day, many were anxious about the future. Some were afraid that their health would be bad or they'd be dependent on people. And others were worried about their children growing up in a Europe that was very unstable and that politically or economically looked like getting worse rather than better. And the women were very worried about young people. They said their grandchildren came to visit and they seemed to have no idea of their own other than what they got on social media. And that they didn't really want to talk or play, that they were just on smartphones. They were anxious about the future because they had no control over it and they didn't know what would happen. I'm telling this because when I read the first reading today, the people that Joshua and Moses, they were exactly the same. They'd been in the desert for 40 years and everything was predictable. But now Moses is dying and they have to go among strangers and they have to cross a river where they're exposed. And they're afraid. I wasn't able to say much to the people in my class who were afraid of the future. Joshua was a bit more resourceful. Joshua was a good theologian, and he said to the people, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear. The Lord has sworn that he will be with you. It is the Lord who is going before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. I think that's about hope. The Council of Trent was worried about the future of the church. And it started looking for past. It talked first about the doctrinal things, but then it said, how can we make sure that the church won't break up? It has already started breaking up. And it did two things. It set up seminaries so that the priests would not be superstitious, that they would learn and they'd know rather than be apprenticed and not know. The other thing it set up was the catechism. The catechism was to educate the laity. And the Council of Trent catechism was in use until maybe 50 years ago, slightly adapted. It was a series of questions which children learned. For example, when I was 7 or 8, if I was asked, why did God make us? I knew that God made us to know, love and serve Him while we're on earth and to be happy with Him in heaven. Later on there was a question, enumerate the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The gifts of the Holy Spirit. Well, I don't know if you could enumerate the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But the Holy Spirit's gifts were faith, hope and charity. And hope, it was explained, was not an expectation that what you expect will happen. It was not an expectation that you're in control. Hope was a belief that God was leading and that whatever happened was for your good. And I think it's good for us to remember that in our lives we all tend to be anxious about the future. I'm a good example of that myself. But in my dealings with students, I often feel, especially I deal a lot with Theology 4 this year, and there are a lot of expectations and hurdles that Theology 4 have to deal with. Research papers and comprehensive exams, and they want to be sure that nothing unexpected is going to happen. They need to be in control. They're like my classmates, and they're like the people that Joshua was dealing with. They fear what's unexpected, and they want to be in control. And you're not in control. And I think all of us have these worries about the future. And what the reading today tells us, again, is it is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed.